in an earlier video, which was titled, Is God the Devil? And Religion a Disease, we explored questions raised by atheists such as Dawkins and their criticism of religion in our society. The flip side of the question, and I started with part of it, was to ask the question of whether atheism itself was a religion or capable of being a religion. One of the viewers wrote back and said that atheism was simply a lack of belief in God, and that while atheists could have dogma, there was no dogmatic atheism, that the dogma became whatever that was, and it wasn't atheism. That's interesting, but I think what makes atheism important in our time is the fact that it's not that there are people who do not believe in God. That's probably always been true, or people who don't care about spiritual matters, who don't care about religion. What makes atheism important, and it's there in Hitchens and it's there in Dawkins, is the fact not that it's dogmatic, but the fact that it seeks hegemony, seeks to place itself not on an equal footing with religion, but place itself above religion and proposes a platform, whether it's the medical metaphor, for removing religion from society and talk about a reign of reason. I think we've already suggested that these regimes, whether they were in China or in Hitler's Germany, these atheist regimes that allegedly were devoted to reason, quickly proved how shallow and superficial that reign of reason, how rapidly it could turn into a reign of terror. Now, to understand atheism as a religion, it's not very difficult. There are some world religions that are non-theistic and therefore atheistic, but they're recognized as philosophies of religion, and some of their ethical standards are not incompatible, for example, with Christianity. However, modern atheism exists almost to the degree that it puts itself in opposition with Christianity and proposes itself as a model for replacing Christianity as kind of the core concept for a society in the West. And it's important because it has declared this ambition to become the dominant metaphor. Now, usually it's, for example, someone saying that reason should replace faith, and advocating reason as a substitution for faith. Dawkins himself talks about reverence for nature, a reverence for inquiry, a sense of wonder at the world as sort of a natural religion, and suggests that many scientists have this kind of natural religion as opposed to having kind of belief in an all-knowing and all-powerful God. But the problem that we have is one that I suggest that we talked about in our last talk, and that was the problem that if you're only bound by reason, what really imposes limits, morals, ethics, on your standards, on your conduct? What does the atheist have or atheism that has the equivalent of the Ten Commandments? A bunch of thou shalt nots that hem you in and make sure that you're not a threat to yourself or others. Can reason do that? Some people have suggested that utilitarianism is a basis for doing that. The greatest good for the greatest number. But how do we know what's good and what's a sufficient number? There once was this concept of kind of the natural law, but that's been rejected by very many of the reasonable people who we should otherwise rely upon. I think it can be seen that atheism in our time functions in our society. Not every atheist, not all atheists, but the kind of evangelical atheists function to offer an alternative and are involved in this process of trying to turn the world upside down, rewriting our history, rewriting our social connections, and producing a society in which it's every man or woman for themselves, and not living within any kinds of bounds or, that traditionally society is viewed as God imposing on man, or the natural law, the law that God writes into the heart of man, being a limit on human behavior. Instead, everyone, all the time, everywhere, will impose his own rules based on his own concept of reason. Now, Mill, the 19th century philosopher who wrote On Liberty, of course understood the limits of reason guiding society and individuals making decisions for themselves. Mill very quickly arrived at the conclusion that it was the better people, the ones who had virtues, the ones who had self-control, the ones who had education, those people were the ones who could be free to reason for themselves and to make a host of decisions, and that others, less well-educated, with less self-control, that those somehow had to be limited or controlled either externally or internally. And this is a problem with any kind of regime of reason. Pretty much it begins to dissolve into a regime where those who think they're brighter, swifter, better, stronger impose themselves on those who are weak and impose themselves out of their best insight. I think the real threat to a free society that comes from kind of governing it purely by reason is that our ability to rationalize any form of evil, look at the 20th century, is almost unlimited, and that we do need some kind of safeguard, some kind of control that prevents us from totally destroying our world because we don't have any limits. Atheism, I do believe, in the 20th century, 21st century now, is a religion. I think it's one that's evangelical. I think it's one that seeks, in many cases, hegemony over the society, and it seeks to repress or suppress the older religion and to place itself as a principal metaphor for a society, and to replace the moralities and limits of religion with those of what it defines as reason. And sadly, this is not really discussed fully about the kind of social intentions or societal intentions of atheism, and the discussion is mostly conducted on whether there's a God, and do you believe in God, and this and that. But it doesn't take into consideration the full impact of making the transition towards being a godless society.